All right, so it's time for another design commentary. This is the design commentary for Module 2 for Thorn. If you are watching this live and you haven't watched the first design commentary, the video's up on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube later on, the video link will be somewhere on the screen, up there, down in the description somewhere. But just sort of like to set the stage here, Thorn is one of the fantasy RPGs that I'm currently working on right now. It borrows on, or the sort of the core assumptions of Thorn is that we're diceless. So we're not using any dice, and we are not using health as like two main things that deviate it from a lot of other games. It's about puzzle solving and kind of creative combat, very much focusing on narrative interpretation during combat and stuff like that. And yeah, that's what the game is. The core rules have like sort of outlined how that generally works, and then I'm creating these modules that are sort of these optional rule sets that you can glue onto your game and see like what works, what doesn't work. It's also a way for me to design without having to write the whole book in one go. I can write it in smaller pieces and kind of post it in these small pieces to see what people think as I'm in that process. So I've really enjoyed this sort of modular approach, and we are now on module 2. I have 3 modules planned for Thorn. Does that mean after the 3rd module I'll have made everything? No, but I think I'll have like the core concepts of what the game is all about by then, and we'll be ready to kind of like step away from the modular thing and like start thinking about how I'm gonna sew it all together into a complete game. So the first module was about expanding on the combat rules, just kind of further elaborating on them, helping people understand, because it's pretty bare bones in the core rules of the Seedling Edition. So like that module helps kind of expand a little bit more about sort of the intent behind that. And this module is about the thorns themselves. So it's about essentially the classes, right? What I'm calling masks in this game that your thorn is going to choose when you create your characters in the beginning, and that thorn mask relationship and what that all means. And so this module contains 4 classes. There will be more in the full game, and as sort of a reminder, this is modular, this is early. Nothing that you see here is like set in stone. This is just like proof of concept. As you can see, this is going to continue to show off great artwork from Galen Peugeot. Galen did 4 thorns, which you'll see in the dock, and then for each thorn, a trio of like masks. We'll talk about the masks in just a second here, but as you can see, it's a pretty cool variety of like funky looking masks that your thorns can choose from. This is just some of them. Like I said, the goal here is to sort of help build a little bit more differences between the thorns themselves. Seedling Edition core rules is very a la carte, meaning here's a big list of equipment, here's a big list of tactics, which are kind of like powers or abilities, big list of talents, which are sort of these narrative things that you can always do. Choose whatever you want when making your thorn. This approach is, rather than having that big old a la carte list, it's choose a mask, and then that mask is going to have a starting weapon and piece of equipment for you, and then additional, like a constructed list of tactics and talents that fit the sort of the vibe or theme of what that mask is all about, with some slightly revised advancement and creation rules to outline, or to match up with that new approach. This also like briefly touches on like what a thorn actually is. This is only just like a dip into sort of the world building that is going on in Oberyn during this time period. If you've watched my other stuff or read any of my other games, this word Oberyn has appeared in a lot of places. It is the world in which all of my games take place, regardless of the time and genre and things like that. They all are on Oberyn in different time points of Oberyn's history. So this is part of the fantasy time period. The basic premise is that magic is overflowing in the world for reasons. Those reasons are kind of alluded to in this, but they're also like sprinkled in things like rune, if you read carefully, and stuff like that. As a result, magic is all over the place. It's causing this sort of like rapid growth in Oberyn, so it's sort of like the Garden of Oberyn is now the norm. And there's these trees that are just soaking up all this magic. And so Thorns are adventurers who start adventuring because they carve wood and bark from these trees, and they make masks and weapons out of them. And the masks are just soaked up with this magic. And as a result, it imbues a particular type of magic, a particular vibe into that thorn. They start to slowly transform themselves over time, which is not really talked about too much here, but you are turning into something else when you're a thorn. But that's sort of why you suddenly can do essentially magical things in this game. That's why the tactics can feel very powerful. So yeah, that's like the pitch here. So let's talk about the thorns themselves. Who are the 4 thorns in here? Again, everything you see here isn't like set in stone. It's early on versions of things, including names, abilities, all that sort of stuff. So specters are kind of like the rogue class. Here's the art that Galen did for it. Basically, the premise of the specter is that they get their masks and things like that from trees that grow on battlefields, which means they're just soaked up with death energy and spirits and stuff like that. So specters are sort of these thorns that are responsible for blinking around, being quiet, backstabbing, but also like having close relationships to spirits. The cool thing that I like about them is they have these sort of ethereal knives, which we'll kind of talk about here. So if you're a specter, you have these spectral knives. And here's a good opportunity to kind of just talk about like what each of these masks is going to have. You're going to find a weapon, which will have like a brief description of the weapon, the range that it's used at, and then some sort of effect. This is either like a narrative interpretation of what the weapon can do, or it might even be something like slightly more mechanically defined, like you'll see that with the second thorn. A tool, which is entirely narratively defined, which is kind of the theme of this game. And then you'll see a list of things that you can get for your character. The talents, the tactics, there's 6 tactics, 4 talents, and 2 other advances that exist right now. And it'll be that way for all of them. So I'm not going to like read every single one of these. This is more just like a, hey, what are the overall intentions behind these classes? The thing I like about the Spectre is like their knives, like the handles of these knives are cut from this wood that is like basically a ghost willow trees. And so they are just slowly pulling the steel part of the blades into the spirit realm, which makes them very ethereal, which allows you to use these knives on most enemies that have like mundane protections. Read this, right? Your blades cannot be stopped by conventional or mundane protection such as armor or hide. What is that? Why is it written that way? What is the goal of that? Remember in Thorn that like grunt enemies, like regular schlubs, they just die from any source of harm. So if you stab one of them with one of these knives, they're dead. Some enemies have defenses, which are these sort of narrative obstacles that you must overcome. If you can, then you can take them out. So it's sort of like these check boxes. They're not mechanically defined. So it's not like must be hit with a piercing weapon or must be hit with a fire sword or something like that. They are just, might even say something like, has extremely reinforced plate armor. Cool. So somebody who's just like bashing against this thing with a regular weapon, that's not enough. You have to think creatively about how you would overcome that armor. One way is to just be a specter, because your ghost knives just go through that stuff. They don't go through non-mundane arcane defenses, like arcane defenses and things like that, but they do go through armor, hide, stuff like that. That doesn't mean only the Spectre can get through those defenses. Everybody else can too. They just have to describe and maybe do things a little bit more creatively. Spectres excel at killing armored enemies as a result. So that's kind of the vibe here. The talents very much borrow on the ideas of kind of being connected to spirits. So like gaining knowledge from spirits or being led by them. But there's a sort of a bargaining process in that. There's also, I'm kind of playing around with the talents to have these sorts of things, like if-then statements of sorts, like as long as you have one use of flow remaining. So like, let's say you build this character, you have 3 points of flow, and you've spent 2, you still have 1 left, then you can walk through most walls and doors. But if you've like burned all your flow, or your approaches are also your health, so as you're taking damage, if your flow has just been reduced to 0, then you don't have this ability anymore. So I kind of like those sort of slightly mechanically defined talents, and then the ones that are just, here's just a thing that happens. And here's also where I'll kind of talk about like how the tactics are written. They're written as, some of them are more mechanically defined than others. They definitely are written based off of your using the first module. So I'm sort of assuming that you are going to be using like the zones and paths tech and stuff like that from a combat perspective. So like some of them are very like relatively mechanically defined, like backstab. Move to any zone where another thorn is located, so you can go super far away and deal weapon harm to them. So you just stab them with your ethereal knives, dead. Harm is an intentional word here in this game, meaning like anytime weapon harm is done, remember enemies die from one source of harm, while those more defense-focused enemies will die from one source of harm, but you have to have checked all those defense boxes first. Thank you, Beast. I'm glad you think it looks cool. Glad to have you here while you're lurking at your day job. Others are less mechanically defined. For example, Banish. Touch the tip of your knife to a foe, they get sent to the spirit realm till the start of the next round. What does that mean? I don't know. It's kind of up for you as a table to define what that means. I like this. You can give your other thorns the ethereal effect, so everybody has ghost blades for a little bit. And then this is a relatively common power or tactic that you'll see a lot of these thorns have, which is some ability to identify defenses of enemies. Because otherwise they have to kind of figure it out through trial and error or through observing enemies to try and figure out like what are the things we have to do to overcome this enemy. Sometimes they might just want to just know. And as a reminder, all of these tactics in particular can only be used once per fight. So, this allows you to kind of like quickly just read the defenses of one enemy. But there might be a few enemies that have defenses, but at least you know, like, okay, we know how to kill that thing. We know what boxes we need to check. Who on our party wants to start addressing that thing while the rest of us also hold off the grunts and also figure out what the other elites in the party needs. So that's kind of cool, right? I like that stuff. I like that, Mr. Matthew. Right words don't define them. Teach players to sneakily become game designers and disappear into the shadows. Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great way of thinking about it. Every class also has 2, I'm just calling them other advances because I don't have a good name for them right now. One is always just a permanent boost to an advance or an approach, and then the other is something that will affect the weapon power or effect that you have. So if you take this, now the ethereal knives can cut through arcane defenses. Now your knives are unstoppable. They will cut through anything. But you have to take this advance. So that's Spectre. I love a big beefy boy in a game. They got these sort of like tank defender classes in most of them. The Bulwark is the they get their masks and their weapons and everything from these ironbark trees, which essentially are almost like metallic in appearance. I also love Galen has this kind of like cool vine wrap that's going on alongside them, sort of like shielding them in multiple ways. The Bulwarks are, as you can kind of imagine, the defensive class, which is represented by the fact that their weapon is a shield. So they literally just beat things to death with their shields. I like the power or the effect of the shield, which is more mechanically defined than the Spectres, right? So like this one is whenever you take harm, ignore the next source of harm you take. So you effectively have like double health as the Bulwark, because let's say an enemy stabs you in the back of the leg, you take harm, which would reduce one of your approaches, but then you go into sort of a defensive mode, and the next time anybody tries to hurt you, you kind of shrug it off with that shield, which then leaves you open to get stabbed again, but then you get the shield back up. So you are relentless. You're very hard to be taken down. Yeah, that's true, Mr. Matthew, right? That it's not an amount, but a source, exactly, because that's part of the game is like enemies by and large are going to just do one harm, but some of them might do more. And so you can play with that, like, okay, you shrug off that one, but now here comes an enemy that's doing this massive hit that is actually going to like drain 3 of your approaches. And so yeah, it's kind of an interesting dance. I like this tool. You just have a completely indestructible chip of a tree. What are you going to do with it? I don't know. You can decide what you want to do with that. But you have it. I kind of like this idea of the Bulwark being sort of a protector, and as a result, they're kind of beloved in Oberyn. Other Thorns, not so much. Like, people probably are weirded out by Spectres, but I think they like Bulwarks, right? NPCs would just be like, oh, good, you're here. You protect people, so come on in. We'll give you stuff. This one was great. Brendan Leon Gambetta was on the stream when I did the design work for Bulwark, and I had this idea of just kind of like being able to yell loudly and everybody can hear you. And then Brandon kind of added that extra twist of like in any circumstances. So like the party is kind of having a discussion at the table, or, you know, NPCs are having a discussion, and the Bulwark, when they speak, people listen. I kind of love that idea that like they can just be like people, even if it's just sort of speaking at regular volume, it's loud enough that everybody can hear them. Is really neat. I love that. Yes, exactly. Less about volume, more about sort of this commanding presence. Again, we're seeing this sort of ability to like detect defenses. Vine Dome is my homage to the Titan bubble from Destiny. If you throw down a Vine Dome around the zone that you are in, so any harm that would come from outside of that zone can't get to you all. The thing that I really liked about when I was thinking about stuff with the Bulwark is, you know, there's only so many ways you can write defensive powers. So what I wanted to do is also make them like be able to mess with the map of the space. Remember, we're not using a grid, we're using zones with paths. And so the Bulwark can make paths between 2 zones that weren't normally, because they just like block a path, or they make a path by like just shield down, smash their way through everything, and create a walkable path between 2 zones. I like them as sort of a control defensive person rather than just like I shield you. I shield you. I shield you. Um, love a shield throw. Gotta have a shield throw. And then again, this is sort of some of the narrative stuff, right? Slam your shield on the ground, blast everyone in your zone with a massive concussive force. Does that say that it kills them? No, it doesn't. You might at your table interpret that as like, yeah, that pulps all the grunts in the area. But that also might be like hitting somebody with a concussive force might be the thing that you need to overcome one of their defenses, right? Maybe they are like on some sort of elevated platform. And so you do this and it's like you use this to like smash apart the platform so that they come toppling down. That defense is checked. I love that sort of narrative interpretation. I think it'll be a friction point for a lot of people who will go like, well, what does this mean? And that's understandable, but I kind of like it and I embrace it. People can gain your shield up ability if they're near you, which I think makes sense as sort of a ability to take. The bulwark can carry stuff. Starlit. They get their masks from these trees in Oberyn that the leaves literally have the patterns of the constellations kind of imprinted into them. So they're these very like divine heaven, like celestial heaven sort of vibes. Reading the stars is sort of an understanding of like fate and destiny and things like that. And this is probably my favorite piece that Galen did, is the Starlit. It's just exactly what I wanted it to be. This is the piece, I was telling Galen, like, I think Starlits are like equal parts regal looking and like otherworldly and a little uncomfortable to look at. Like, I think people see them as like majestic, but also just like deeply unsettling to be around. And yeah, I think this art is majestic and deeply upsetting. To like, you wouldn't want to be around this thing for too long. And just like the Starry Night in the cape is really good. They have a sort of a rapier. The idea for me with this class is that they are precise. That they hit exactly when they want to hit, and they need to be, they're where they need to be when they need to be there. So a rapier felt like the right weapon because it's a very kind of precise pointed sword as opposed to just like slashing people up. And this one is essentially the opposite of the Spectre, right? So this can get past spells and charms and arcane defenses, but it can't get past like armor and hide. It's not as good at that, but it can get through this other stuff. And the sort of the rationale behind that is not only to balance things so that Spectre and a Starlit can help each other, but also because I sort of have this idea, like if the Celestial is about like fate and helping people reach their end and their fate, and they can't escape destiny, is like I imagine a lot of people would try to use arcane methods to avoid death and fate and stuff like that. Charms, hexes, spells, things like that. And to the Starlit, that's just not acceptable. So their rapier is able to kind of just go, no, and cut right through that. You got a stone, it lights up. It's a little torch. I really like that. The stuff for the Starlit came together pretty quickly and easily for me compared to some of the other classes. I really like the idea of just getting a glimpse of what what the future might hold if you sit under a starry sky. This one I really like. You can just appear suddenly when you are most needed. You're just there. That just feels really good to me. It just feels like, yeah, I'm here. I was supposed to be here when at this exact moment, and you're there. The tactics. So this one is not as focused on hurting things because I don't think that's kind of the Starlit's role. The Starlit's role is more in helping support the other Thorns and to help overcome elite enemies. So like this one, you learn everything. Again, learning defenses is all of them instead of just like a single defense. You freeze people up. I love this one. You choose an enemy you can see. They die when any single defense is overcome instead of all of them. So again, these elite enemies that have defenses, they'll vary. Some of them might just have one defense. Like, yeah, I've got some thick armor, and so it's harder for you to kill me than all these other goons that aren't wearing armor. Some will have like 3 or 4 defenses. Those are going to be like boss level enemies, and like the ones that like are going to take some time to figure out how we kill this thing. You can kind of just go, nah, it's kind of, I'm going to unravel you essentially. And as long as we take out any single defense from this enemy that I've marked, essentially, that I've weakened, they're dead. It's pretty cool. I like that. I like the idea of moving all the other thorns, rotating and stuff like that. And again, like, not really a big damage person, but I like the idea of burning starlight raining down. What does that mean? I don't know. That's for you to interpret at the table. And then here's sort of, again, this character is truly about like taking care of elites and stuff like that. Target an elite within weapon range and overcome any defense of theirs that has been revealed, regardless of what you would need in order to overcome that defense. So the defense might be there are 3 runic totems in the area that need to be smashed to break this person's shield that they got up. You could go around and try and find them. Or if you have revealed that defense through something like, I don't know, read fate, then you can just say, I break that. I destroy that. So this is really an elite killer. That's what starlets are for, is for killing elites. They don't really deal well with massive groups, obviously, of grunts. That's not their job, but they can take care of elites. So what are you going to do when it comes to massive groups of elites? You call in the Draco Knight. These are sort of these draconic knights. Again, Galen just really crushed it with the art. I love the little sort of like tree, yet like dragon claw boots. Draconic knights get their masks from these ember leaf trees that grow in draconic regions. The kind of the vibe of the Draco Knights is, again, sort of like there's a nobleness to them in that they are sort of knightly characters, but they're also just like goddamn terrifying because these are the destructive people of the Thorns. These are the ones that do a lot of damage. They have these spears that sort of like cook in fire for like a year. You bake in a roaring pyre for an entire year and dragon flame is captured within. So the cool thing about the weapon with the Draco Knight is as long as you are close, so within the same zone of a source of roaring flame, you may use this thing twice. So as long as there's fire around you, you can kind of hit 2 people at a time with the spear. So you bake. You like being around fire. So the goal is to try and either create fire around you or find fire around you and fight near it. You also can make a dragon roar. It doesn't necessarily mean that it summons a dragon, but it might scare people because they hear a dragon, and that's spooky. And this is sort of where the talents are where you get to kind of see like the 2 sides of the Draco Knight. Because in equal parts, they are inspiring. Other people might look to see something like this and it rallies them, right? So rally those who have lost heart. This can kind of rekindle them. But it can also literally just burn something to just reduce it to ash. You can just touch a mundane object and it's just ash now. Which I think is really neat. the tactics, the powers for this knight are very focused on destruction. Throwing your spear, it deals harm to every character in each zone it passes through. And that's a thing about the Draco Knight, is a few of its powers hurt every character. When he says every character, that includes Thorns. So you can hurt your fellow Thorns, but you can also just wipe out the board. And so that's a balance when you run a Draco Knight in your party is, yeah, they're gonna like kill out waves of enemies for you at a time, but you're also probably gonna get burned in the process, and you just kind of have to accept that, right? So the same thing here with Inferno. Your zone that you're in, everybody gets ignited, everyone, but you're fine. And remember, if everything is burning around you, your spear is activated. So if anything gets close to you again, you can just start stabbing. um, I like this. This is again sort of that inspiring thing. So the Scorches or the Thorns can benefit from your inspirational mode. This is also how they can recover approaches after you've burned them. So you might burn them with like Drake's Flight and then hold your spear aloft and be like, don't worry, it's okay that you burned. Be excited as we move into the next phase of this fight. This is also kind of a neat way to take care of elite enemies, is burning away a number of their defenses equal to your max force. So force is just one of the 3 approaches, and the idea here is, you know, your maxes go down as you take harm. So this isn't always whatever you set it at during character creation. That stuff goes down and then you have to recover it. But like if you have 3 force, you can just burn away 3 defenses of elite. That might be just open them up to have anybody take them out. So a lot of like destructive stuff, like waves of fire and things like that. And then I wanted to kind of create an opportunity for you to keep that fire thing going on. So whenever you harm an enemy with your weapon, their corpse remains as a roaring inferno. So once you get it started, it like kind of just burns and burns. The fire is hard to put out. So yeah, that's module 2 here for Thorn. I'm really excited about it. It's going up on itch right after this stream. So if you're watching this after the stream, then it should be up already under the THORN Seedling Edition. There's going to be a whole 3rd module, which is going to be sort of focused on exploration and the camp and everything. So I'll talk about all of that when it gets there. But thank you all for watching this. I hope you're excited. I'm excited to make more Thorn stuff in the future.